Hello and welcome to my video where I'm going to show you how to repair a hole in your jeans using a piece of patterned fabric and some simple stitches. In order to follow along, you'll need some iron-on fusible web, an iron and ironing board, a ruler, a pair of scissors, some fray check if you have some, or if you don't, pinking shears are one alternative, some kind of fabric pen or pencil that will show up on your fabrics, a hand sewing needle and thread, and a piece of medium weight woven fabric. I'm using some striped woven cotton. A lint roller for clearing up stray fibres is also very useful. As you can see, this pair of jeans has a fair amount of damage and I think would best suit a visible mending method. The first thing you'll need to do is cut a piece from your woven fabric that will be big enough to cover all of the damage in your clothing. Then cut a piece about the same size from the fusible web. You then need to hold these two pieces together and cut out a neat shape that will be the final shape for covering the damaged area of clothing. I just cut a rectangle with rounded corners. With my fabric pen, I drew a line at the same point on one end of both pieces. And this is just so I know how they fit together since they're not perfectly symmetrical. Now trim down the edge of the fusible web by just a few millimeters so it ends up very slightly smaller than the woven fabric. Then apply fray check all around the edge of the fabric patch. If you don't have fray check, you can just cut around the edge with pinking shears instead, or even sew a zigzag stitch along the edge. This is to try and prevent the edges from fraying. Okay, so now it's time to fix these pieces into place. So take everything to your ironing board and turn your jeans inside out. I've decided to keep the frayed edges around the tear, but if you wanted to cut these edges off to make a cleaner look, then now would be the time to do that. I then lined up the fusible web and woven fabric over the damaged area, making sure the fabric completely covers the web. In hindsight, I would recommend cutting a hole just bigger than the hole in the jeans out of the middle of the web before this step. You can see here how I did that in another project. The reason is that when you iron the web, it melts and attaches the fabric together on either side. You therefore run the risk of attaching both sides of the leg of the jeans together doing it this way. However, it did all work out totally fine when I did it. So it's your choice, but I would recommend erring on the side of caution and cut a hole in the web first. Regarding which way up the woven fabric needs to go, make sure it's placed right side down. My fabric is reversible, so it's hard to tell, but the back of it is facing upwards. Then all you need to do is follow the instructions on your pack of fusible web to fix the patch to your clothing. Mine said to steam press on the wool setting for 10 seconds. Check that it's fully attached, and if it isn't, keep pressing with the iron until it is. Then leave it to cool. For the next step, we'll be sewing over this patch. Not only do the stitches look nice, but they will also secure the patch in place a lot more durably, since the fusible web isn't enough to hold it in place forever. Sashiko is a style of traditional Japanese embroidery that's both practical and decorative, and it's the inspiration for the mending I'm doing today. That's why I'm going to use a Sashiko needle and traditional blue Sashiko thread. But if you don't have those, feel free to use a few strands of embroidery floss, or even crochet thread instead, plus any appropriate needle. The needle just needs to have an eye big enough for your thread and be sharp enough to go through denim or whatever fabric you're sewing into. You may also find it helpful to use an embroidery hoop to hold the fabric flat, but I'm not going to use one. I first drew a sort of symmetrical shape around where the majority of the damage on the jeans is, and I did this freehand using my water-soluble white fabric pencil. This is the area where I'm going to stitch. I then started vaguely in the centre and drew a series of vertical parallel lines across the area. If you want to make sure that every one of your stitch lines is perfectly straight, feel free to draw a line for each one you're going to create. However, I personally just drew a few lines using the width of my ruler as the distance in between. The idea of these guidelines is to help me keep the sewn lines parallel and even. I'll be aiming for 5 lines of stitches per ruler width. Roll up the leg of the jeans so it's next to your outline. You want to make it as easy as possible to reach the back of the fabric where you're sewing. How I like to begin is by taking a strand of the thread, folding it in half, and then feeding the 2 ends into the eye of the needle. I then bring the needle up through the fabric, like so. You can begin anywhere along the top or bottom of the outline. You don't have to start in the centre like me. Then you make 1 stitch by moving a short distance along the line and going back down through the fabric. Once the needle is inside the jeans, find and hold the looped end of the thread as you pull it through. Take the needle through it and pull tight. This can be a bit fiddly, but it neatly secures the start of the thread. Bring the needle back up through the fabric, and then you can carry on stitching all across this area. Note that as you sew, it's best to have your hand inside the clothing to separate the layers, so you don't accidentally sew them together. Then go back down through the fabric, and come up, down, and up, and so on, trying to space the stitches as evenly as you can. This is called running stitch. To speed the process up a bit, I like to go in and out of the fabric a couple of times before pulling the thread through. Just don't worry about getting it perfect. Note that the stitch length is really up to you, but I would recommend something in between 5 and 10 millimeters. Mine is about 8. When you get close to the outline on the opposite end, try and space the stitches so the end of the last stitch falls on the line. Then make another line of running stitches in exactly the same way, going in the other direction. How far apart you space these lines is totally your choice. If, like me, you're not using an embroidery hoop to keep your fabric flat, it's a good idea to stretch everything in the direction the stitches are going in fairly frequently, so that you're not accidentally puckering or wrinkling the jeans. Once you get to the end of your strand of thread, take the needle through to the inside. Then either go under a nearby stitch or go in and out of the fabric patch to make a small stitch. Pull the thread until there's just a small loop. Take the needle through this loop once or twice and tighten. Repeat this again, and then cut off the excess thread. You then secure a new strand of thread in the same way as you did previously. As you can see, I'm working from the centre out to one side and then from the centre out to the other side, but you could go from one side to the other instead if you wanted. Once finished, you should have something a bit like this. And all that's left to do is to rinse off the pencil marks. And here you can see how it looks on the inside. The fabric patch is now covered in stitches, so it's extremely well attached. And that's it, that's how you attach a patterned patch and use Sashiko embroidery as both decoration and reinforcement. I really hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.